if you don't mind, we record it also for those who cannot be present at the moment. Welcome to the session on online assessment. It's the first in 3 sessions this week. I see that many others are still joining, and that will be, I guess, the case for the rest of this session. In total, for the 3 days, we had 220 registrations, so it's really a topic of interest. And before we go to the first speaker, I just want to sketch shortly the context of why we organized this special interest group in online assessment, and what the outcome was in the report. So, first of all, why now the SIG on online assessment that we have covered for 1.5 years with some 14-15 universities that are member of EDTU. It's mainly because there is a growth of interest in online education in general, not only for continuing education and professional development, which need flexible education, scalable education, for upskilling and reskilling, but also, of course, due to the COVID crisis. We saw that there was, of course, a boost in online education. We see that almost all, well, let's say all universities in Europe shift to online education, and we're facing challenges not only by providing online education, but also the assessment, of course. Online education that was provided, we distinguish in 3 formats: in synchronous, hybrid education, blended education, and fully online education, but all supported by elements of online education, and often forced to have also online assessments. We see that, of course, many universities were struggling with emergency remote online education, but also we have within Europe many universities that are also a member of EDTU, as that is our core business, are very well equipped in providing online education, although they are also having challenges with online assessment. But most European universities are actually missing the expertise and the experiences that are related to digital education. On the one hand, also the institutional frameworks to support it, have affordable business models, but also lacking the leadership and the professionalization of staff in providing online education and innovation processes. EDTU is in general supporting universities European-wide in further developing and innovating higher education by online education, and we have several services that we provide in that sense, like the e-excellence. It's a quality model for online education. Empowering universities, it's our Empower website, where we provide expertise on related topics to transition to digital and online education. And in that sense, we also thought about focusing last year on online assessment. As related to the growth of online education, there is a bigger demand for online assessment, of course. And to do so, we brought together in a special interest group members with institutional expertise on how to design and plan institutional online assessment, and develop strategies in that in relation to that. So how to organize online assessment, do the assessment to really assess the learning objectives, the learning outcomes of the students in an online setting. We had several meetings with the group. Like I said, it was 14-15 universities. And first of all, we wanted to list by Padlet. We made inventory of all the challenges. Then we also linked approaches to the challenges with it, and then good practices. And this has resulted in a report. And I'm just going to share shortly my screen on that. This report here on designing online assessment solutions that are rigorous, trusted, flexible, and scalable. And we put the link to that report in the chat now. In the coming 3 days, we have every afternoon a session on this. We will present the results of the special interest group, first on assessment design today, tomorrow on trust, privacy, and ethics, and the last day on operational process. And then we also have a short panel session to capture all topics that were presented this week. For this afternoon, we would like to start with one of the core partners of the Open University UK, Klaus-Dieter Rossade. He will have a talk on assessment design and assessment futures. Then followed by Diogo Casa Nova from Universidade Aberta in Lisbon. And then followed by José Aznarte from UNED in Madrid. So let us start by giving the floor to Klaus-Dieter for the first presentation of the results of the SIG.
Thanks, George, and welcome to the event. I've just actually taken the title of the report for the title of this first presentation in this Empower series. And if you don't mind, if you allow me, let me just digress a little bit. When I was a 10-year-old boy, I just loved that TV show, and you may remember the Impossible Missions Force. They were experts in operational planning, electronics, detonations, and they all came together, and there was a mission. And the line used to be in the film, your mission, should you choose to accept it, is, and then they said what it was. And it was then followed by, they remarked, the message will self-destruct in 5 seconds. And then you saw something like this on screen. There's some fire coming out of tapes. And I kind of want to take that as a starter for when it comes to online assessment, what is our mission? Should we choose to accept it? What exactly is it? And those are the questions I think that we were trying to answer in the report and in the SIG. And George has already now mentioned all those dates. The 4 focus areas as part of the Empower series. Now, if you think about it, assessment design is really at the heart of everything, because in a way we need to design assessment that it meets the privacy and ethics requirements. We need to design assessment that can be trusted, that we can operationally deliver in a sustainable way, and that also is the right mix between human and technology. And so I will be focusing on those in this talk today. Assessment futures is a slightly different question. It's actually, why are we doing assessment at all? What is it that we want to assess? And I think we need to answer that one first before we start designing. And maybe the online assessment, the disruption from COVID gives us a chance to do that in a way we maybe didn't think we could do 2-3 years ago. Now, what we found in the work of the group is, and we found that out immediately in all the sessions, online assessment is here to stay. I've got some data later to support that as well, but everybody was working on solutions knowing that some of that will be part of the future. And we are maybe in a transition phase now from exam hall to online home exams. And as a distance teaching sector, we have a long history of home-based assessment. And in a way, EADTU member institutions are best placed to lead in EADTU, the organization, to help us do that. And what came out in those 1.5 years work is that there's already a variety of hybrid solutions to online assessment. So you could almost say the future is already here. But thinking of a couple of principles based on the GISC report from February 2022 with February 2020 with some principles and targets for 2025. They say, okay, what should be the principle? It should be authentic, move away from acquiring knowledge to acquiring transferable skills in a more realistic way. That's a very open way of saying it. And it doesn't mean that we don't do this already, but I think this is what I meant with rethinking it. Why do we actually, what is it that we want to test, and what is the testing for? Accessibility is a welcome principle in that we really must make sure that everybody has access to a chance to show what they can in a way that suits their needs, especially if they have particular needs that we need to meet now. Appropriately automated is just to get that mix right between automated and human. It could be marking, could be feedback. Continuous refers to the data and analytics to assess the effectiveness and the impact on continuous assessment. In a way, that's the move to, do we really need to have that final big, heavy, high stakes assessment point or not? What can we collate as the student, our students study towards their goal, and make that part of the assessment? And of course, it should be secure. So it should include elements of authoring, detection, biometric authentication, and all of that. We need to be able to trust it. Then a few months later, they came up with another report with some case studies of what universities had done in the UK. And they had 3 key words here: relevant, adaptable, trustworthy. And there were some 7 points that they made around these 3 words. And that's, it has future assessment should be relevant to the time and needs of students and employers, should be student-centered and personalized. That speaks to the relevant. Anytime, anywhere, efficient and manageable speaks to the adaptable. And then trustworthy is around academic integrity, the data use and ownership, and fairness. Let's keep all these words in play as we look at some of the examples, and actually as we discuss and listen to other talks over this Empower series. There's a few other features of future assessment that we maybe should bear in mind. It still remains the most significant prompt for learning. If you do have an assessment date ahead of you, it really does focus the mind. We know that. Authentic assessment here should be grounded in realism, providing cognitive challenges, and that trains authentic evaluative judgment. So this is very much the higher education element of it, that we can give a proper evaluation in our given discipline, whatever we face. Not to forget, encourage and support. That's what assessment should do, not tripping up people. We could think of ways Shoot and Kim has proposed stealth assessment. So you just weave it into the learning experience. So it doesn't really stick out anymore. And so I've just been starting doing Duolingo. Just wanted to see what it's like, because everybody talks about it. And in a way, Duolingo is assessment. Every question they ask you, it's an assessment. You can fail or you can succeed. And when you succeed, it's a ding. Otherwise, you just do it again. And that means assessment could also be very low stakes, as you have a frequent repeat, dynamic personalized progressions, and performance data to contribute to final course results. In the assessment design chapter of the report, I'm kind of I've collated all the kind of things that came up in our sessions, and various universities, experimented with, well, change the number of assessment points, change the stakes, maybe have more formative assessment, or change the weighting. Colleagues experimented with the format, open closed book exams, what time limit should be given. And colleagues were also keen to gather the evidence, to just know whatever of the things that we've done that seems to have worked well, that we can do it in the future, but also we know why it works well, and we can learn from that. We all had to navigate, and any assessment design has to navigate quality standards, the student needs, institutional and the regulatory context. That's particularly important if you think of those high levels points that I made from the JISC reports. There's a balance between existing and new technologies. There's some really great examples from member organizations who just took very, very simple existing technology and made it work in the pandemic online situation. Some of it may be good for the future, some may need some rethinking, but a lot of it is there already. Choice and flexibility is part of the design, and one of the presentations today is about that. Authenticity and personalization by design, and as has often been pointed out by people, you have to take academic staff along the journey. So Just two examples. The report has a general text, and then we have what we call 15 good practice case studies. And I'm just here pointing you to two of them. At the Tampere Applied Sciences University in Finland, they added flexibility in student choice by adding a weekly assessment to the final exams in an online engineering course. And these weekly assessment points were automated, and students could retake them as often as they wanted at a time that suited them. And you can see from that short description that matches a lot of the points that I just talked about the future assessment. In a way, it's already here. It's flexible, it's low stakes, you can retake them, it's automated, so it's sustainably deliverable, and it still meets the criteria because there is a final exam. But you know, this was just a quick reaction to, I think, disruption. Who knows where the university will be going? And then Diogo will be talking about the virtual pedagogical model. And what I find interesting here is that choice is a stipulated part of the assessment strategy of the university. And if students can opt for continuous assessment or single endpoint assessment, and if they both work for the purposes of the pedagogy, then it really gives students the option to choose the one that lets them show best what they've got, what they've learned. I want to sort of conclude a little bit with some data here that we've just collated. And this is high level and not developed in detail, but we were asking our students, and of the total number, over 1,000 returns, we took a sample set with results around online assessment. Now, preferred exam type, when we asked them one or the other, you have a 21-79, so 20-80 split between online and face-to-face. But if you then ask, what are your feelings about taking online exams, it gets much more interesting, much more nuanced, and those who are absolutely negative, that number is suddenly down to 5%, and you have somewhat negative, somewhat positive, a lot in between. So if we force them to do one or the other, then you have a greater number of people who say, well, it has to be face-to-face exams. If we can just get down to the various feelings that underlie these statements or these decisions, we have a chance of designing assessment that will be that will meet the needs, hopefully, of the students, employers, and our institutions. Just hang on. Yeah, sorry. We then asked, okay, whatever the option is, would you like to have the option for a face-to-face exam, or would you like to have the option of an online exam? And here you can see that the option for a face-to-face exam for 16%, it's very, very important. If you add the moderately important, it's 30%. That is a sizable number, and we need to know why it is important, and whether there are things that we can do, that we can address to take whatever drives that answer, drives that away, and it may make them feel, well, we don't need them anymore. It may also mean, if you look at that, we have to have some kind of hybrid version for quite a while, and maybe there isn't a one-size-fits-all. We'll need to see. Certainly, when it comes to who would like to have the option of online exams, if we just take very important and moderately important, you're already by 2/3, and add the neutral ones, then you say actually there's a great acceptance amongst the students. And the final question here is acceptance of invigilation options. So we asked them, which of these, would you reject, accept with some apprehension? So that blue is reject, apprehension, accept with apprehension is amber, and gray is accept. And if I ask you for a moment, read from the bottom up to the top, using your computer to complete the exam, that's that's a given. That's the vast majority accepts that, probably wants that. And that really should make us think, if we are still thinking of going back to exams where you sit in a corner, you write it by hand. So certainly we need to move here, and the students are certainly with us on that. When it comes to verification, having a potential invigilator contact you to check taking the exam, or verifying your identity by showing an identity document, it's a very low number of people who reject that outright. Again, it seems like there's quite a lot of acceptance for that. And when it comes to then verifying identity with facial recognition via webcam, or voice recognition via webcam, or then a temporary restriction on how you can use your computer, like using a lockdown browser, there's clearly the rejection percentage is significant for us to look into. And again, we haven't done that work yet, but what is it exactly that makes it reject them? And are these things that we can easily solve through assessment design, or through ways that achieve the same identity verification without feeling intruded by? And tomorrow's session we'll talk quite a bit about that, and the speaker Jose later will also has also quite some experience and research in their university. So I'll finish off with Johanna. She is our latest member to our family. She was born in July 2021, and I've just sort of well, first of all, if you look at her, she's held by her grandfather, that's my brother-in-law, and she holds the finger of her great-grandmother. That's Rini, and she's 98 or something like that. And I did ask her once, because she would have been like, she never went to university. She would have been in school, let's say, in the late 30s. And I asked her whether she had any exams like in school, and she confirmed, yes, in school is sitting in rows, and you need to write something, whatever you've learned. And it occurred to me, well, fundamentally, a lot of our exams prior to COVID were still very, very similar, certainly in UK schools, and also in many of the subjects of our universities. Now, Johanna, if she goes that route in her development. Okay, in 2037, she'll do her GCSE exam, so that's like when you are 16. 39, it's A levels, that's when you're 18, and then she will probably do some university if she goes that way, or does apprenticeships, whatever it is. There will be more exams, and I think I'm coming back to the theme, our mission impossible. I mean, we are the experts. We should really make sure that when Johanna sits her exams, and all the Johannas in this world, that they do not have an exam that is so similar to that of her great-grandmother. And that's an exam that's really relevant to the kind of skills that she needs to have to flourish in the middle of the 21st century. And we need to set into motion that now. That is our maybe impossible mission, should we choose to accept it. And now this message will self-destruct in 5, 4, 3, but it doesn't matter because we've already have it in our head. And thank you very much.
Thanks, Klaus-Dieter. Thanks so much. Applause is showing in the from the participants, and rightly so. I think the main message here is that online assessment is here to stay, and it is a trigger also for all universities and to build a strategy and approach on that and learn from each other in that sense. And that is also what we are doing here in the stake and today. And I see some questions in the chat here. Mainly the main question here in the chat coming from Susanna. I don't know if Susanna wants to take the floor shortly on explaining her question on the temporary restrictions, because that's some of the concerns coming from the table that you showed, that so many students have problems with temporary restrictions on their computer, I believe it was.
So, we do know from earlier surveys that we've done. We've done a similar one last year. That one of the big worries for students regarding online exams is technology, and I've recently done an interview remotely, like a presentation, and was really important. And then my technology just totally didn't work. And I have to say that was a terrible experience. I can so feel for that. So somehow technology has a way of failing us whenever, you know, in the worst possible time. That is a principle of life, and we need to work with it. In some cases, what are the plan Bs and the Cs? So how can we help students be ready? To you know, if one thing doesn't work out, well, what's the alternative? Can we have a support system in place that I recently wanted to join a session and I couldn't, and then I was given a support number, and then I was put in a holding line to I needed the support now, and I couldn't get it because the systems weren't right. So there's operationally something to consider. And if things do go wrong, then we also have the processes in place that they can just quickly let us know, and then that we find alternative arrangements. And those alternative arrangements need to be agile. It cannot be, so, well, you missed your slot, well, come back next year. That can't be the right way. There must be like a rapid reset or something like it. As George said, I think, you know, or we all said, we are going in that direction. We just now need to get it right. And if we can allay the fears or worries about technology, we also have a chance that students will just be able to perform at their best, because if you're worried about that, you just can't.
Yeah, and it's well, students are very much used to work with technology, of course, and doing everything online. But I know also from experience from my own children, if they have an examination and then there is an automatic pop-up, and then you get immediately a warning: if this happens again, your exam will be shut down, and they don't have the control over the pop-up at the moment in the examination. It's really stressful, and affecting maybe also the results of such an assessment. Let's check, Klaus-Dieter, if we have other questions here, or people can also ask to take the floor by raising their hands.
I'm just reading Abdullah's comment here, which is, I just think, do we think we can solve the problem by drastically changing the ways we test students? Oh, I think absolutely yes. So when I said we are in a transformation period, and we are transforming, or transition period, we're transforming from the way we've done assessment and now trying to find good ways of doing that online. And that's all good and very well, because we had to do it at speed. And in many ways, it just doesn't make sense to go back to what we have. But going further online, what is it? What is assessment actually for? So is it to test what they know so we can give them a certificate? There's certainly an element to that. Maybe one assessment point is like that. But what about if the other ones are all developmental, formative, in fact, even inspirational and fun? So Duolingo, I mentioned it. I mean, that's entirely based on gaming principles, and it's almost like addictive. I mean, could we imagine that there's a I mean, I could cheat on Duolingo one way, but why would I? Because there's just nothing in it for me. And could we get to the point where people do want to do the assessment because it's the feedback for themselves? I got it right. Or that they just have fun, like you know, if you do a 10K race, you know, you're tired, but you want to do that. Can we design assessment that's so that maybe they could it really, assessment should be embedded in the learning process in a way that it's the learning and the assessment cannot be divided. And that small part, how we then test at the end, or so that student has enough data, has given us enough data so we can say, yes, you deserve your bachelor of whatever it is. That would be great. Almost so they don't even know and they don't notice it. And that's what where I took what I took from the notion of stealth assessment as well.
So any other question there in the chat?
Digital shaped by our lack of digital competencies. Yeah. Stylianos, I think there's a whole piece of that, and that's where if we get the software right, the technology right, it has to be easy to use, and we need to be able to train them, give them enough time, train them, give them a chance, for example, to try it out, which could then already help. Try it out as often as you want. That could already help them allay fears. When I do a presentation, I just run the speed test now several times just to know that my connection is stable. And these kind of things, if you can, before the exam, if they can just have a test run, that may already help, and have sufficient and easy to understand information to support them. Yes, the digital skills we need to develop.
Yeah, and I saw also a remark which we strongly agree with, is that it's best to have the option of online assessment as well as face-to-face assessment. So when it's possible, have the option of both. So for some students who really need to do it face-to-face can have that option. That solves also a lot of discussion or with the university and the students, if that is still an option.
So I just very quickly on that. So we are actually going down the online assessment route at the Open University, and Carlton, who is the speaker on the third day, he's leading on that project in our institution. And certainly for now, it's clear we need some kind of hybrid option, because there's some subjects where we're not there yet, maths, physics, the kind of thing where you need a traditional exam. And also some personal needs of students that we need to take into account, including digital equipment or having space at home, to do a proper exam, with the kind of headspace that you need. So maybe there is no one size fits all, and us forcing students to come to exam hall is just a century-long process of dragging people into a situation where some perform really well and others just don't. And if we can improve that, I think that would be a highly desirable development. Thanks.
Thanks, Klaus-Dieter. Thanks for your opening of the 3-day session on online assessment. And as indicated, this special interest group was also building very much on good practices that we collected. And we'd like to continue now with a good practice from Universidade Aberta in Lisbon by Diogo Casa Nova.
Thank you, George. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon from Portugal. Thank you for inviting me and the Universidade Aberta to present today a session on this event. And also thank you, Klaus-Dieter, and all our colleagues from different institutions that have been working throughout this special interest group on different elements of assessment. Has been a real pleasure, and I'm sure we've learned a lot, particularly us. We've been very much informed by some of the things that we've learned throughout the last year. I should say that. Can you hear me well, George? Yes. Okay. I should say that it's obviously the challenge for us also, Universidade Aberta, to be presenting today. I've been seeing colleagues from different places, both from face-to-face institutions, but also online institutions. And we, being a fully online institution, have our own challenges in assessment and online assessment, but there may perhaps be different from your institutions. So it might be not completely applicable in terms of mirroring some of your concerns and some of your challenges. But anyway, I think the main challenge I had today doing this presentation was the idea of me presenting something along the lines of student-centered and flexible assessment strategies, because what we've been learning so far, particularly throughout the last 2 years, is that although designed to be flexible and to be student-centered, our pedagogical model is not yet fully accessible, fully student-centered and flexible. So I think it's one of the elements I have today for discussion is the fact that we also still have a long way to go. And I think one of the lessons we learned throughout the last year with the colleagues is that we don't have a 100% right solution. We have to learn, and we also have to adapt our own the different type of assessment pedagogies and methodologies to our own institution, and every institution is different from each other. So in relation to Universidade Aberta, we were created in 1988. So I'm relatively new in the university, but the Universidade Aberta was created in 1988. And historically, we were used to teach, like the OU in the UK, we used to be teaching with cassettes, with video cassettes or with sound cassettes sent to the students. And we had the tradition that the assessments were done face-to-face. So students would have to come to campus, they would have a tutoring discussion, they would have to do the exams. And as Tilianos, which by the way is very nice to see him again, mentioned just before in the chat room, there were some concerns about online education from professional bodies and quality assurance agencies. So we had challenges that we had to overcome, and we found that doing face-to-face exams in 88 was the best solution to do it. So we had throughout almost 20 years, a big part of 20 years, done everything face-to-face, exams and content, tutoring discussions with students, but the content was sent to students through a cassette. In 27, 28, we integrated our pedagogical model, our virtual pedagogical model, which Klaus said that it tried to enable flexibility for students, and it does give flexibility of choice in terms of assessment, but it created some constraints to the academic staff. So our staff weren't fully trained on online education. They had some experience with online education, of course, but because the students and the staff had very few knowledge in 27, and you have to understand that 27 seems, very, very close to us, but it's been a long time in terms of online education since 2007, and therefore a lot of things changed, particularly with the students and with the technology and how we access technology. Mobile phones are now completely disseminated. You can find internet everywhere, but in 2007 you couldn't. So a lot changed since then, and for us it was a big development to be creating a pedagogical model completely online. Everything became online. We created the pedagogical model thinking about assessment online, but then we had some constraints in terms of recognition, in terms of professional recognition from professional bodies, but also from the quality assurance agency. And we had to maintain the face-to-face assessment in an endpoint. So as a last element of assessment, students would need to do a final examination face-to-face. And it's been like this since 2008 to 2020. Things now have changed because of the pandemic, and I will go through that later on. But the pedagogical model, when we changed the analogic to digital, we focused on 4 main pillars. Digital inclusion, so showing that students were digitally included and that technology was not a barrier for them. Student-centered, so always focus on the type of students we have. And I think it's important to address the issue that our students are not the normal type of university students. Our students are the average around 43, 44 years old, mature students with a strong professional links because they are working already, they have their own personal family. They have not been studied for probably some of them more than 20 years. And that means that the concept of exams, the concept of assessment is very different.
Camera is off.
So on that, we have to understand that the students also impact how you design your assessment strategies. A lot of the model was created through flexibility of choice. And that's not only on assessment, it's also on registration, on enrollment in each of the modules. So our students can enroll in the number of modules they want every year. And that means you can do 1 module, 2 modules, or the 5 modules per semester that we encourage students to do. In Portugal, we have a structure with 30 modules per course, 5 modules per semester. So you can, as a student in the Universidade Aberta, you can choose 1 module, for example, if you only feel capable of doing 1 module, if you have a very intense professional life. So the flexibility of choice is not on assessments only, and I will address the issue of assessment, but also on the way you engage with university. You can be much more embedded and much more involved with university if you're feeling in a particular academic year that you have time for it. But you can also do something different, which is only enlisting in 1 module, for example, or maintaining your registration as at the part of the course, but don't do any module in a semester. And also interaction. And interaction here is not just teacher-student or tutor-student, but also student with students. And the interaction element is always and has been extremely important as part of the pedagogical model. All of those 4 pillars are core part of a online course for students, for new students, that we try to implement or increment those values as part of the course, but also as part of the expectations that students can be waiting for if they enroll in the course. But there is still this mixed approach, and we still have this. So the Universidade Aberta, Portugal is a relatively small country. And it's not in Spain, just for clarity. We had some people asking if it was in Spain. No, it's not in Spain. It's on the left side of Spain, but it's a very small country. And we still have, as part of this small country, which has the size of Austria, for example, or Greece, we have 19 exam centers plus 3 delegations. So it basically means 22 exam centers, and we still have them physically. So we are using it for different purposes now since COVID, but we still have this, and we still have consulates because we have a big, what we say diaspora, so a lot of immigrants, expats living outside the country, Portuguese-speaking people that were born in Portugal, but went abroad. In the UK, for example, we have a large Portuguese community in France, in Switzerland, in Luxembourg. And we open the courses also to these immigrants. So because we are completely fully distanced institution, we can offer the courses to them. But the exams have always been a struggle for them because they have to go to the consulates. And the consulates are usually on the capital cities. So for example, in the UK, if you're living in Birmingham or in Manchester, which are 2 big cities, you have to travel to London to the Portuguese consulate to do your examination. In France, if you're living in the east part of France, so Nantes, for example, you have to go to Paris to do your examination. So it becomes overcomplicated, and even in terms of resources, because it has to go in a diplomatic bag and then sent by transportation. It's a really, really complicated system. So the advantages of our pedagogical model, and some elements I already mentioned. First of all, guided activities for every module. So we have, as part of the pedagogical model, fully online provision, but it's a completely asynchronous model. And that means that activities have to be created and presented to the students. So they are able to learn as part of these activities. So we don't only make available content, but we also make available activities. And some of those activities are assessed. So that's part of what we call, and I know the name is probably not very easy to understand as in English, but we call it e-folio, electronic folio, which basically means a sheet of assessments that they have to submit. And so activities can be either assessed or not assessed. And as part of these assessment activities, those are the formative elements that the students get feedback. And those formative assessments will then be counted as part of the e-folios. I mentioned this before, we are dependent on final face-to-face examinations, or we were dependent on final face-to-face examinations, and I will address the issue of choice later on. We encourage a lot of reflection on professional experience because our students are different, as I mentioned before, so they will have a lot of experience. They may be doing a course in management, for example, or in education, and they are already working in a sector, so they can bring a lot of rich experiences to the forum discussions or to the group work, and that I think it's particularly valuable for the students' learning. Interaction, so we have a tutor scheme created to support the students, module leaders and peers. We do a lot of peer assessment and peer learning as part of the pedagogical model. We have something called POOC, which is the plan for the module, that sets up all the expectations, both from the students and from the staff. So all activities have a date, they are supposed to be submitted. All the assessments have also a date. All the feedback release in the grades have also a date. So all of this is part of what we call the POOC, the plan for the curricular unit. And finally, I mentioned this before, the enrollment per module and the possibility for you to select which modules you want to enroll on. So as part of the assessment, this is how it operates. It's a relatively simple, and apologies for the picture is not very good quality, but it's a relatively simple model to understand. So we have what we call the continuous assessment route, which at least will have 2 continuous assessment activities and 1 global assessment. And those 2 continuous assessment activities will assess learning outcomes that are developed in topics that are in between the module. The global assessment will have to assess all the learning outcomes. And eFolio 1 and eFolio 2 are part of the activities, the activities that I mentioned before. Each of them counts at least 4, each of them counts 4 points from 0 to 20. But you can have more than 2 eFolios. So you can have 3, 4, 5 eFolios, but on average, they will have to have 8 points. On the whole, they have to have 8 points, adding all of them together. And that means that students, if they want to go to the global assessment, which is the final assessment, they have to have 3.5 mark, adding all the eFolios together, which is a passing result in Portugal, and then they can do the global assessment. They also can choose a final exam. That doesn't necessarily mean that they don't engage with the course, they do, but they may have different challenges in their own professional life, and they may want to choose just doing a final examination. And that final examination counts 20 points. All of those were done face-to-face. With COVID, we had to take the 20 points assessment and the 12 points assessment to online exams. And that has been a challenge, and I will address this later on. But just for a quick observation on the module. So one of the key elements there is that we have 30 modules per program. So if it's an undergraduate degree, and those 30 modules per program will mean, if you times all of this up, if you choose the continuous assessment route, 90 elements of assessment. So even if you're a student, for example, we discuss a lot contract cheating, plagiarism, and all of those academic misconduct elements. It becomes extremely complicated, particularly for contract cheating, to be contract cheating 90 elements of assessment, particularly when 60 of those are connected to the activities. So it becomes extremely complicated. And this is part of the robustness of the system. Because we have assessment points with those eFolio 1 and eFolio 2, we know what students are doing. And what students will know what they have to learn, for one hand, and how they are doing each module, so if they are doing well or not, but also it allows us to monitor student learning. And we identified as part of these checkpoints whether there is the possibility of dropping out. And as you know, there is a lot of literature on dropping out in online education. And we believe that by setting up several assessment points, we are able to monitor who is at risk of dropping out, and we're able to engage with them and try to find a solution for their study. And there is an issue again of credibility, and by creating this ecosystem, this assessment ecosystem, we were able to provide some credibility. We have much more bigger number of assessments in the Universidade Aberta than normally in another institution in Portugal, particularly bearing in mind, and I have experience of working in the UK, the number of elements of assessment that we have in Portugal, which is usually much bigger, because we also have a number of modules that are higher up than the UK, and I'm assuming comparing with your countries, I don't know, will probably depend very much country by country, but we have 30 modules per program, which is a relatively big number of modules. So a couple of elements we find positive and negative on the pedagogical model. Consistency, which is a positive element. Everyone knows what they have to do. It's easy to train the staff. The system is well regarded by both the staff and the quality assurance agency. Staff are adapted and trained. So when I mentioned consistency, I was also thinking about the student that knows what they have to do every year, but the staff are also adapted. So they know also what they have to do, when they have to submit their assessments, how the feedback is done. All of this is very consistent. There is a degree of choice. You can argue you should have more degree of choice, but that's something I think we can discuss later on. And we have a lot of volume of data. And when we were talking about learning analytics, predictive analytics, AI, and how AI can help learning, the volume of data that we currently have in how students are learning does give us a big advantage comparing with face-to-face institutions. Negative, often lack of relevance in authentic assessment, particularly for the final assessment, which is mainly done in examination format. Still, often lack of innovation and creativity as part of this final assessment. And the model does not align fully with the pedagogical model in what I at least think from an academic point of view, flexibility of space and flexibility of time. So things change a little bit for us in terms of COVID, but not as much as for you, as you can imagine. So the provision in the way that we deliver learning is very much similar. However, the assessments, we have to move everything online. So from doing face-to-face examinations, we have around 8,200 students, which means if you times all of this up with 90, which is the 90 elements that the student has to do in assessment, it does give a big number of elements of assessment submitted in our platform. But still, things didn't change as much. Of course, we start having questions about the robustness of the system, particularly in terms of e-proctoring or the lack of e-proctoring system. If we had to switch to an e-proctoring system, we started having questions about GDPR and data protection, about ethics, about the students, the type of students we have, about the technical requirements you need to have. So all of those challenges that I believe you also had in your own institution. We had a second element that was not necessarily to do with COVID, which is a regulation, which I think it's relatively innovative, but you can argue is not. So I'm very happy to be convinced otherwise. But in Portugal, we have one specific decree law to regulate distance education courses. And that is the Decree Law 2019-133. So I know even that by heart because I've been constantly making reference to it, as it is now really, really important for all courses in Portugal. If you want to provide or if you want to make accredited a new course, the quality agency will be looking at how you respond to different challenges provided by this decree law. And the decree law makes some references which I think are important. One of them is that if you want to offer distance learning program, 75% of your ECTS, at least 75 of your ECTS have to be delivered online and predominantly delivered with a physical separation between the participants in the educational process, teachers and students. There needs to be interaction and participation technologically mediated. And they focus very much on the online academic, but also on the technological support. And this basically opens a lot the space for learning technologies to start working much more in Portugal, which is relatively new in Portugal. It's a kind of rule that you don't have so much in higher education. You have the technical support, but not so much the instructional designer or the educational developer support. The curricular design is oriented to allow access without limits of time and place. And you have to have a pedagogical model. So they kind of follow the Universidade Aberta. And they made reference that if you want to deliver an online course, you have to have a pedagogical model that provides that consistency as part of the way you deliver learning. In terms of assessment, they focus very much on digital inclusion of students, the fairness, the reliability, and the accessibility. And then because we are in a very, very traditional country, Portugal is still very much traditional, higher education institutions should define formative and summative assessment methodologies that integrate face-to-face assessment or through technological platforms. So what comes first is face-to-face assessments, then comes the technological platforms, and then comes ensuring reliability of the assessment developed. So focus very much on how you are able to ensure reliability on the online assessment, not so much on the face-to-face, which is an interesting one. Then comes the technology and how technology can impact our university. And this is a very, very recent quick poll result from EduCause in an interesting paper they've just submitted in the beginning of June on the artificial intelligence used in higher education. And they made their question to their audience institutions about some elements of how AI can help with online assessment, and particularly instructional tasks. So not so much on online assessment, but you will see a lot of this will be part of online assessment, which is also interesting because it seems that AI usage is more focused on the assessment element than on instruction and delivery. But some of those elements we are also looking at. So providing feedback on assignments is something we are looking at, the potential use of AI. And you see here, not very far away from the 21% that respond to this poll, saying that they are also looking at this potential use. Tutoring, we are planning and piloting initial stage of using AI for personal tutoring to students. Grading assignments, we are tracking for potential use. Creating personalized learning opportunities. Again, we are also tracking for potential use, although I think we are still a little bit far away in terms of how content is created in our platform, and therefore how we can use them to customize almost a Netflix experience to our students. Proctoring, we are currently piloting and starting an initial usage of online proctoring, and of course, plagiarism detection software, which we have already a license and we've been using fully in all our courses. So AI also becomes a new thing, and it opens some elements for what we can do. So first of all, we decided to move 100% digital, and that's completely made the decision. We've been doing this for the last 2 years with COVID. We now want a more robust system. And this robust system is not only being asked by the decree law or by our academic staff or by myself as Vice Director for Quality, but also it's being asked by the students. So they want more reliable system, a more robust system, and they are not particularly concerned about proctoring, which is an interesting one, I think, to reflect on. We want to encourage more continuous assessment, and we want to encourage, and Klaus made that reference with Duolingo, we want to encourage low-stake assessments because that enables us to be monitoring students and to collect more data about the students' experience and the students' learning. Promote alternative and more authentic assessments instead of final exams. We want to move away, carefully, of course, because we have our challenges with the QAA in Portugal and with professional bodies, but we want to move away from exams and from final exams. And we want to reinforce the use of data and predictive analytics in particular, with trying to anticipate student success and dropouts. We want to embed even more assessment into learning, using AI to support learning, as I mentioned before, and to make more training available to our students, to our staff, so that our staff are able to create more innovative and more creative assessments. I think that's one of the big lessons we got from COVID, is that because we had a pedagogical model that was very, very constrained in some aspects, we found that we needed to provide more training to our staff to try to create different ways of assessing their students and providing some more innovation to the way they were assessing students, and to, of course, enable more authentic assessment. So coming back to the first slides, we think we are in the right path, but we are still moving towards student-centered and flexible assessment strategies. We are not still yet there. We want to design assessments more relevant for our students. We want to keep continuing focusing on reflection in practice and on practice. So we want to encourage students to learn on their own professional settings, if possible, but also about their professional settings, highlights the value of dialogic feedback and encourage more dialogic feedback with the staff, with the tutor, with the machine, if it's artificial intelligence, or with their peers, and of course, encourage better usage of peer instruction. So some final considerations. We had some big impacts with COVID, decree law, and technologies. A lot of the open doors that started to happen for us, particularly looking at the decree law and the technology, because those gave us some framework of how we can be looking at how we're going to assess in the future. Analytics, data visualization, and predictive analytics. AI, I mentioned before, we are already having and developing highbots to support the students, interacting with the students, providing meaningful learning. Auto-grading and feedback is an area that we are looking at, particularly for self-assessment. We think it's important, not so much the teacher assessing the students, but more the students being able to self-assess their learning. As Klaus was saying with the Duolingo or with Grammarly, for example, you can do this also. We found that really, really important, particularly with our students, because our students learn very much by themselves. And I think that's, again, an important aspect when you're looking at the institution and focusing on your own context. We still have a long path to make learning and assessment fully student-centered. We look at micro-credentials, again, hot topic that we've been discussing in the EditEU, but also in the Netflix format of education, where students can choose the content or the credentials that they can learn and be assessed based on that, on those content, and enabling them to create their own learning path. And I think that's probably where we are following in a few years' time. But for now, the most important message is reinforcing continuous assessment. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Diogo. Thanks so much. I am looking into the list of questions here. One question which is sometime on the board here is how do you check each student's assessment? Could you please talk about that? Is that clear enough? Should we
talk a little bit about that if you want? So of course, we have our data analytics system that enables us to understand how students, when they are submitting their assessments, what they are doing, the kind of results they got in the different modules that they are enrolled. We also have Turnitin now. We used to have Urkund. We now use Turnitin for plagiarism detection. That gives us some more data on how students do their assessment and write their assessments. But there is very much the tutoring support and the feedback to the students. So I think that's the main area where you're able to monitor, besides the data that you collect, is also how students are learning and develop that learning. What I do think is things will change very much in a couple of years with data and with artificial intelligence. In my view, and it's a lay perspective, but it's one that is supported on what I've been reading and what I've been discussing with providers, is that we have the data. So because we have a volume of data that is significant with student submissions and the quality and the content of submissions, we will be able in a very short period of time to start collecting that data and creating technologies that are able to both help the students, but also give us a better understanding of who the student is and how to engage with learning.
Mm-hmm. And I saw a question there on how do the students respond to that?
So with I forgot to say remote. I was just looking at José's presentation there. It's fine, José. I didn't mention e-proctoring because I know there is a session now on e-proctoring, but we did proctoring is interesting. We talked with our pedagogical council and read a series of representations from the students' body, and they prefer to have some form of vigilation than not having anything at all. They want the assessment to be fair. And the same applies with Turnitin. If you think about Turnitin, it's a very much, from an ethical perspective, it's very similar. You know, we are comparing data from student submissions, data that is theirs. They've written the document, they submitted the document, and we are appropriating that document and comparing with other people's documents and then making judgments based on what an AI machine is saying. So it's not very different from an ethical perspective. You can say, oh, but you're not blocking, or you're not using a camera to record, but you're also using devices and AI and using content that was produced by the student. And they are very positive on that. Actually, they want even more. They want to have the possibility of understanding how they are doing, if they are plagiarizing or not, if they have to change the text, how they can change the text. And really what they really wanted is something like Grammarly, if you know Grammarly. They wanted some support, some tutoring support coming from the AI to improve their work, from academic writing to referencing to improving the quality of the text, to the arguments that you use and the way you use it. All of those are elements that AI can already help because of the volume of data. And like UNED, I imagine, we do have, because we are distance learning institutions, a significant volume of data.
Yeah, a related question here from Susanna is, how do you analyze all these data? Is there software used for that?
So we have an in-house software we've developed through Power BI, which we are improving at the moment. So we don't have a specific software for data analytics. We have an in-house one.
Yeah, so that is covering the data analysis, the in-house one.
Yeah.
And did it require another agreement with the students and going more to continue the online assessment? Did it require a new agreement with students, or did it the original agreements with students fit?
So it's the original agreement with students. It's been discussed and negotiated. We still have, you probably heard in the news, we still have very high numbers of COVID in Portugal. And that means that we still have a justification for doing online assessments. Students feel much more comfortable doing them from a computer than in campus, in a room with 30 or 40 or 50 colleagues. So and our types of students, we are based in Lisbon. We have, as I mentioned before, several examination centers. So, but even with those, students prefer to do it from home than moving back to those delegations or to those exam centers, which is always, the closer they are, it's always 20, 30, 40 kilometers by car, by bus, and that could take an hour and a half. So it's much more comfortable for them to do it from home. That's not, I think, an issue. I think the biggest issue is inevitably we'll have complaints to our data protection agency. So we have to create a narrative and we have to engage with them and have a new agreement signed. So when we start using the proctoring system, which will be from September, we will have that we have to take into consideration, and that is a new agreement. So responding to the question, yes, we will have a new agreement, but it's one very targeting to the new proctoring system, not to the online assessment itself.
Yeah, no, clear. And the transparency towards the students is very important. We also
and also giving them time and space to learn how the system works. Not giving them a full developed system that with all those technologies in block screen and cameras and picture taking and sound recording and voice recognition and all of that, without explaining how the system works and without giving them time to experiment on the system, to do a test that is not assessed, but it's one that they are more familiar with, so they can adapt, they can understand how the system works and how they work with the system. I think that's really crucial.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, not overwhelm them.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your questions also.
Very relevant for all present here to hear about these experiences you represent. Thanks, Diogo.
Thank you.
In line with that, we also have a next contribution by José Aznarte from UNED in Madrid on avoiding e-proctoring, ensuring trust. José.
Yes, sorry so much, Diogo, for the interruption. I was just trying this sharing thing. Yeah, it didn't want me to confirm, just launch it, so sorry. Thank you so much for having me today in such an interesting forum. I think it's the best place to discuss these things that we've been hearing from Klaus-Dieter and Diogo and the rest of speakers after me as well. I just wanted to present our experience at UNED I will do it briefly, and I will do it from a technical point of view. And yeah, the most important thing for me would be the comments and questions afterwards. So please don't hesitate. I will just cover some context at the beginning, then I will talk about the ethical framework for the use of database technologies that we have at UNED, and I will tell you about how we solved the problem of assessment under COVID in UNED. So just to let you know my background, I am a professor in artificial intelligence, and I have never ever worked in educational technologies before 2019. So my main interest is time series forecasting with the deep neural networks. And so I come from there. And I think that's important because, yeah, I was appointed Deputy Vice Rector for Digitalization and Innovation with a wonderful team. That team was the reason I accepted this appointment. And we have been working on the ED3 institutional project, which comes from digital, distant, and data-powered education in interface with the IT department of the university. But coming from where I come, what I have is many doubts on the use of AI tools for dealing with people data. Okay, I'll try to shed some light on those doubts, although it's very volatile scenario, and I think that's the main concern. Things change too fast, and we don't have time to study them as we should. So briefly about my institution, it's National Distance Learning University. It's one of the biggest universities in Europe, apparently, over 150,000 students, only in formal education, plus another 50,000 in non-formal education. We are celebrating our 50 years. That's why the logo you saw at the beginning has a 50. Yeah, 50 years ago, there was no digitalization whatsoever. They used to work with letters and phones. So yeah, the scheme that we have today is heavily dependent on that story. That's why I bring that here. So 50 years ago, the most important thing was to fix text, which was the content of the course and which was distributed to students. Students read that text and then came to a face-to-face exam, which is the way that we do exams today. Face-to-face is we have a mixed face-to-face and remote model, where we do have also, as Diogo was telling about Aberta University, network of regional centers around Spain and some foreign countries. We do remote teaching during the course, although the students can come to those regional centers to receive tutoring, but we have face-to-face exams. Face-to-face exams are seen as somehow as a guarantee of rigor in a university, and they are thought as something that distinguishes us from other universities that are fully digital. And so we do have a wide range of different student situations, because our target, let's say, is not primarily people who just finish high school, but rather we have people that are working and they want to improve their work conditions, or people that are working or retired and just want to learn. And that is beautiful, and that's something really nice of our university, which also has a very high number of the people with disabilities in Spain that are enrolled in university or enrolled in UNED, and also is the only university that serves people in prison. So I think it's a very, very beautiful university, and I think that is a good thing. So in 2019, as I said, we started at the rectorate, and we proposed this ED3 project, which was based on a roadmap, including the establishment of policies to guarantee that social and ethical consequences of the use of technology were considered. We wanted to gather all data sources and put them in the same place to make it easy to interact with those data sources and convert them into information. That is the main aim of the whole thing, to knowledge creation that can help teaching and learning. And we wanted to promote through all that interventions based on evidence that could improve those learning and teaching processes. Okay, so that was what we wanted to do. The first thing we did was to establish an ethical framework for the use of database technologies. What we did was identify the need for a shared common sense on the ethical and social implications of the use of technology. Because even though there is some regulation, as we will see later, we believe that ethics go beyond regulation. We can abide by the law, but not be nice people. That is something that can happen, and it happens in technology all the time. So we offered the community to carry out a participatory process where we had deliberations to gather a set of cautions that should be taken to use technologies based on personal data. This process was open during 2 months. A nice share of people participated, very nice discussions indeed. We used a software called Decidim, which is designed for participatory processes. And we proposed 9 basic cautions, and these cautions were discussed, they were rearranged. Some new cautions were proposed. In the end, we end up with 13 cautions that we believe reflect the general ethics common sense that we can share at this institution. So finally, a document with this set of cautions was released, and these cautions had to do with general things like care, like responsibility, transparency, consent, property and control of data, validity and trust of those data too, participation of the people that are being affected by those technologies, privacy, of course, preventing potential adverse impacts beforehand, effective communication of what we were proposing, adaptability to different kind of situations and disabilities, and the right to explanations. So this is the first thing we did, and then we were ready to roll, let's say. But then, of course, COVID came. So we had to leave everything aside, and during frantic months, we had to solve the big problem, which was assessment under COVID. As you recall, we do face-to-face assessment normally. We cannot do that anymore. So what are we going to do? What we did was, let me tell you before about how we did exams before, because I think it's interesting. You as a student can choose amongst 2 alternative dates 3 times a year, in February, in June, and in September. And you go to a regional center at a marked time, and then you undertake an exam in an exam hall. Those exams take place synchronously all over the world, and those are invigilated by teams of faculty staff, which part of our job is to go to those centers, regional centers, 3 times a year to invigilate and oversee those exams. So of course, since they are in a hall, the students are maybe asked to leave the backpacks and other material before entering the hall, which is something I will reflect on later. And the exams, once they're done, they are scanned. And automatically they are gathered and distributed to each course team. So at the same hour, at the same day, in the same hall, many different courses, exam for different courses are taking place at the same time, right? So this is what we did. And so how can we do that? now? Well, we needed during lockdowns and COVID, we needed a tool to reproduce these conditions. We needed synchronous questionnaire distribution and response management. We needed a variety of exam types because the exam types are very, very different from one course to the other. We needed proper identification of students, which in the halls is done with the ID, and we needed some anti-fraud measures, of course. So, but these measures must be non-invasive, or at least not more invasive than what we have in exam halls. For example, leaving your purse in the door can be regarded as invasive, but it's socially accepted, right? So the big question that started going around from the first weeks of the lockdown was, can we delegate all this process to an AI? Put an AI in your life. It's like something that is being heard very much these days. So that was the question. So what we did was, we studied the whole thing, and we came to a conclusion about the risks of facial recognition technologies for exam invigilation. We did a quick literature review, and the conclusions were not very encouraging. We saw that there are mounting evidences that these technologies can be really problematic. They have technical, legal, and ethical difficulties. Right? I will cover some of the risks that we identified. For example, there is no clear legal framework for invasive surveillance technologies. Even though the GDPR, European law, really talks about these technologies in a very vague manner, what is true is that there is no actual jurisprudence on this issue. So even though if we have a regulatory framework, which I would say is not very established, we don't have precedent cases to enlighten what can happen if we go to court with this. The use of facial recognition technologies might imply a violation of the legal principles of necessity and proportionality. Is it needed? Is it proportional? Legal counselors were saying that these two principles may be violated in these technologies. Okay, I only have ones, but you can imagine it's 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. Privacy rights, of course, that is one of the main issues. Is there anything more invasive than having a professor in your room, looking around your room? That is obviously a problem. These technologies are naturally impressive, and its software is fallible. We know. I, as a computer scientist specialized in artificial intelligence, I know that these technologies don't work 100% of the time. And the problem is that that's okay if you are just in for the money, if you're doing financial forecasting, for example. But what about people? What about these 5-10% of people that are not properly identified because they have darker skin or because they are women with darker skin? They can also produce automation bias, where people that look at the whole process say, oh no, the machine said that, so that must be true. They can also produce discriminations or violations of the equality principle, especially for people with disabilities or different abilities, as I say, and those discriminations are not acceptable. So in the end, what's worse is that they don't work. What hacker culture tells us is that there is no 100% safe system in computers. Probably also not in real life, but in computers, for sure, you can always find a way. So there are plenty of tutorials in the internet telling you how to run a virtual machine inside your computer that will allow you to do whatever you want during an exam through e-proctoring. So it doesn't work. Anyway, what we did, okay, if we cannot do that, what we're going to do is develop our own technology, which is called AvEx, for Aula Virtual de Examen, which is virtual examination hall in Spanish. In 6 weeks, we had the first version operational based on developments that we had already. And in June 2020, we were able to examine over 400 1,000 exams. And there were not many issues. That was the first time. It was a really exciting time, and we were really worried, but it worked. How we deal with security? Yeah, we wanted to, as I said, avoid being very invasive. So what we did is a layered security scheme. That was very fashionable at the time. You remember with COVID, there was no single measure that would work, but we had like a layered system of different measures that would work. Yeah, we copied that idea, and also the diagram you will see now. We had a security measures that were encoded in the tool, in the computer based system. For example, we we also asked the teachers to make an effort to adapt their exams to the new reality, right? We tried to push the idea that the traditional exams were not valid in these conditions, and then we asked a supplementary effort to our teachers that were beautifully attended in most of the case, and we asked them to, for example, prepare wide question banks. So we could select randomly and make every exam different from the next one. We also asked them to move forward to reasoning-based questions, to open book exams, and we asked them to develop a tight timing scheme per question. I will open a parenthesis here, and I will link to something that Klaus-Dieter was saying at the beginning. Our deeper expectation in this sense was, okay, maybe COVID is the excuse to finally change the assessment culture of our institution. And these measures that we asked the teachers were in that line, of course. We also, as I say, put some measures in the application. For example, the randomization, not only of questions, but also of answers, which made difficult sharing. We also had an option for sequential access to the questions. We disabled copy-paste, but we didn't go further than that in controlling the computer of the students. And we took random photographs of the students. Those random photographs were not analyzed via facial recognition, automatic facial recognition systems, but they were attached to the exam, so the teachers, the professors could look at them and maybe know if everything was going on properly or not, and if the person was who they should be. Finally, there were a third group of measures that are different in nature. We asked the students to sign a sworn affidavit before going to the exam, saying that they were not going to copy. We put in place some text similarities software that we developed at home. And we also allowed for a phone interview after the exam, in which professors could fix a date, arrange a meeting with the students and ask them how things were and if they actually knew what they should know. So this is the infographics we sent to the teachers. As I say, we copied the layered cheese security COVID thing. And yeah, what happened? What happened with all these? Okay, after 2 exam calls, June and September 2020, the amount of exams increased very much. In 20% of the courses, there was a statistically significant increase. That was the case for pass marks. In 40% of the courses, there was a significant increase in pass marks, and also in average marks. Half of the courses experienced a statistical significant increase in average marks. But the remote session attendances, the tutoring went remote, and it saw a skyrocketing in 300%. Also, there was a slight increase in disciplinary issues, but nothing that we cannot manage, and nothing so different from what happens regularly in normal face-to-face exams. So this is the number of exams performed during June and September. Sorry for the Spanish in the graph. 2018, 2019, and 2020. You can see how, yeah, there is an increase in the number of people that went to exams in June and September 2020. Yeah, this is the proportion of pass marks. And there is also an increase, not so clear as before, but it's as I said, in a percentage of courses there was an increase of pass, and this is the increase in marks, in average marks. I think it's interesting to, I'll come back to the number of people that went to exams, and I wanted to pay attention to what happened between 1918 and 1919 in June. We can see that there is some decrease in the number of people that went to the exam. This, of course, has to do with the number of people that has enrolled in that year and some other reasons. But the fact is that this is also normal statistical variation, and it didn't ring any bell. It happened the same in September. Anyway, these data can be interpreted in several ways. What do they mean? Is the system less secure, as some people wanted to think, or there are other hypotheses that can be put in the table? For example, people had more time to study. That is a fact. We were locked down, and yeah, some of us spent time studying or doing different things that we didn't do normally. But we also had all the changes in the assessment design and criteria. We had more continuous evaluation. It was much easier to attend exams, and yeah, maybe there was some level of fraud. But of course, fraud is not the only reason, and it cannot be concluded like that. So we asked students, and we did a research, a social research study with 10,000 participants. 86% of students declare negative impacts of COVID in study. So that is obvious, right? 40% link it to mood status, which is interesting. 54% of the people that declare more difficulties to study say that they are work-related issues. 35% is the illness, and 25% less time. There are different elements hitting on performance. Sorry, it's in Spanish again. Almost 35% of the people said that they had more time to study. They had more motivation, less than 10%. It's significant. The differences between man and woman. Man is dark green, woman is light green. Circumstances allow them to concentrate more. Again, very interesting, the difference between man and woman. And studying was an evasion from the pandemic situation. Again, interesting differences between man and woman. Yeah, so these are some of the elements that hit on the performance of students, according to this survey. So the academic results, according to the survey as well, 50% declared to have similar results, and 25% declare better or much better, which is in agreement with what we experienced in the quantitative analysis. 75% identified some positive elements, more time or more motivation. In the end, 67% is happy or very happy with the AvEx solution. And most students appreciated the efforts that we did during that period. But young people had a worse opinion on that, which is also interesting. Regarding privacy protection, we can see how, the amount of people that thought that privacy protection was not very strong in AvEx went below 10%. And people who thought that it was good or very good went over 60%. These are the different schools and faculties. Okay, so yeah, I think we managed to come to some solution that managed to balance this worry that we all had about fairness and security during the exams, with ethical and social concerns about this solution. This was done in a very fast time. As I said, many decisions could be reviewed and retaken in a better way from the experience that we have today. And let me call them the bad news is that we don't use AvEx anymore. We come back to face-to-face exams. This is a decision from the rectorate, and yeah, there are people that are happy and others that are not so happy. So yeah, I'd be glad to hear your questions and comments and to discuss further with all of you.
Thanks so much, José. Really interesting and an impressive job. So quickly taken by UNED in this response also to COVID to come with solutions. And I can feel with Susanna's comment there on an impressive job, all in the assumption that students are likely to cheat. But
exactly.
I always like to change that around and say we have to make sure that students have a very valuable diploma or degree, and therefore must guarantee that other students are not cheating and not the one that that is asking about this. So really impressive.
Yeah, about this, if I may, George. In that survey we had an open question. And many people spent time writing a paragraph or two explaining how they studied because they wanted to. And so cheating was not even an idea for them. And that was beautiful. That was something very beautiful to read. I think very inspiring as well for us, for those of us who read it at least.
Yeah, thanks. And I see a question here from Alfredo. What do you think about the use of e-portfolio?
I'm not familiarized with that technology at the moment.
Okay, I self have a question about what happens if there is a dispute between the students being caught cheating. What is happening then? Because how solid is the proof?
Yeah, that is one of all the problems that we had in that sense. And the people from the, I don't know how it's called in English, the inspection part of the university are used to deal with many cases or some cases like that every year. And the evidence in the internet was less easy to gather, let's say, because a photo is always questionable what you're doing, or not, maybe not always, but many times. So there was many gray cases. There were also cases where we surprised people in WhatsApp groups or Telegram groups with their phone number in the open. So we were able to detect those cases as well that were copying during the exam. But the evidence is as you say, it's really the tricky part of the whole thing.
Thanks. I see Klaus-Dieter, you have a question.
Well, thanks first, Jose. Great presentation. I just first of all, I wanted to say I just like that mix, in the AvEx between some technology solutions, but then also the psychological, your tutor might phone you and all that. And I just wanted to add to and ask you about the scale of the problem of cheating. In our institution at the OU in the UK, we also had an increase of cases of suspected academic misconduct, and we needed to look into that. And I think we do put it down to the stress from COVID and people, just didn't have time and all that. I totally agree. We are reviewing our whole academic misconduct processes because what we've done in the past is not sustainable. It's just it takes too long to investigate each case and make it tight. And we are embarking on a program of really pushing academic integrity as a key learning outcome for all our courses. We must be able to instill the sense of academic integrity as something people want to walk away with and be able to say proudly, yes, this is me. Just like we as researchers and as teachers have a professional ethics, we can bring that to our students. I personally, and I would like to hear what you have to say, but the number of people who will cheat are very small, and if we can have a mixture of pride in achievement plus fear of being caught out, maybe that covers it. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely, absolutely. As I say, we all have a small policeman in our heart. And this policeman went really crazy during COVID. I don't know if you share that, but yeah, there were people, at least in Spain, looking at the window and saying all the people that were in the street, why are you in the street? So, I mean, that is something that is probably very deep in the human nature, and it is in the human nature of people that work at UNED as well. So as I said at the beginning, exams, face-to-face exams are seen by our personnel as one of the quality guarantees of our education. So they were very afraid of losing that. But at the same time, seeing the type of students that we have, people that study because they want to, this worry about cheating is not justified, I think. And I think the data that we gathered afterwards proves that. But it was a battle. It was some discussion, yeah.
Thanks. There was also a question about the phone interviews. Was that on selection or?
Yeah, I probably didn't explain that properly. It was a possibility that the professors had. They didn't have to do it, and they didn't have to do it if they didn't want to. They just had the possibility in cases where they were afraid that the people had copied.
And how do you guarantee you have the right person on the phone?
Exactly. I mean, once you start with the mistrust, where can you end? So yeah, you probably did these interviews by teams if you're worried about that. But yeah, it's true that once you start suspecting, you're lost.
Yeah, and it's also an illusion that the physical examinations are completely 100% proof of not cheating. Yeah, it's part of the system.
Yeah, Inés Gil is here, and she just wrote her experience. She had a course with, maybe she can chime in and explain what she did, but yeah, she did 10 video interviews.
Yeah, it's a combination of instruments and moments, and so that is the strongest system in that. And again, it's also to guarantee that the students get the qualification that has the value of being well assessed and with a solid assessment. I think that's the benefit of the student. It's not to supervise the student of not being a cheater, but it's more to guarantee a solid system of assessment which the student deserves.
And the problem for me is that using technologies for that is in one sense very cheap. I mean, it's not cheap, you have to pay it, but it's cheap for you, you don't have to do anything else. But at the same time, what you lose, it might be much more important than what you win, because you lose the trust of your people. And that's something that we cannot afford.
No, thanks so much. I think we got a really clear picture of the challenges and the approaches and everything that and the concerns that are on the table when touching upon the topic of online assessment. And I really liked your good practices presented today also by Universidade Aberta and UNED. And thanks so much for your presentation, José. And I would like to thank also not only the speakers today, but also the participants. And I hope you will join us again tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. Tomorrow again at 2 o'clock. I think, Stefan, the same link, I believe. We are going to look deeper into the topic of trust, privacy, and ethics. And the third day on Thursday, again at 2 o'clock, about operational processes, technology, and support. So thank you all for this afternoon, and hope to see you again tomorrow.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, George.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.